comrades of the Virasam, for giving me this opportunity to come and be with you and talk about this topic. Essentially, it relates to the tremendous repression being faced by the revolutionary movement today, the huge losses it has sustained, and whether that calls for any review or change in the path it has followed till now, or the tactics it has adopted. Before I get into that, I would like to speak a little about some old memories. When we came into the movement in our student days, it was in the early 70s, the only thing we had was a disgust with the revisionism of the CPM and a desire to link up with the revolutionary movement so that we would be of some use to the people and the country. We had no ideological or political guidance, no contact with any organization. We just had this desire and some crazy ideas that Naxalites are supposed to be in the jungles. So some of us, we were studying in a college a bit towards the eastern part of Kerala. We would set off on early morning walks, walk miles and miles together, go to this mountainous areas, jungle areas, and then roam around there in the expectation that someday, somehow, we will come across a Naxalite or a squad or something, and then we can link up with them and join them. It took us 1 year to finally get in touch with the existing party in Kerala. Then we got involved in activities, we got arrested during emergency, and when we came out jail after the emergency withdrawn and we got acquitted in the cases, I remember I was walking along the road one day and one of my classmates, he was coming from the opposite direction on a scooter. The moment he saw me, he stopped the scooter, turned it around and fled in the opposite direction. So that was the condition in the 70s. That is not the condition today. Despite this huge repression, despite the heavy losses we are suffering, despite a very organized enemy, quite unlike the Congress and all that, we now have a very organized enemy in the RSS and its fascist offshoots. Despite all that, we are not isolated. The revolutionary movement is not isolated, and more youth are getting attracted to it. I recently met a comrade from Tamil Nadu, and he was telling me how over the past 1 month, all over Tamil Nadu, in the various districts of Tamil Nadu, even where the revolutionary movement did not have a presence or active presence, the CPM, CPI and all sorts of left parties, and even this VCK, Tirumavalavan's party, all of them are very actively campaigning on this issue of Kagar, Operation Kagar, and demanding that the government should stop that and get into ceasefire talks. This is going on all over Tamil Nadu, that's what he told me. That is true of Kerala also, because usually whenever our people try to organize something, most of the other organizations, parties, they would keep away from it. But this time, when they organize something on the issue of Operation Kagar and demanding that a ceasefire should be implemented and talks should be started, Bela Bhatti had come from Chhattisgarh to talk about the conditions there. We saw that a large number of parties who were contacted came, participated, declared their support for this type of activity and said that they would be fully engaged in it in future if we take it forward. So that is why I am saying that the conditions are vastly different from what it was in the 70s, when we suffered heavy repression. We lost more than half the Central Committee. Whoever stood on the side of revolution were murdered, assassinated, including the Secretary, Comrade Charu Majumdar. The same thing happened in the case of MCC also, and all organizations which stuck to the revolutionary path. And those who surrendered, like Kanu, Sanyal, Satyanarayan Singh, etc., they were heralded by the enemy. They were taken around all over the country trying to convince those who were in jail to surrender, to leave the path of armed struggle. While we were in jail, these Gandhi Peace Foundation guys had come and informed us that the moment you sign saying that I leave the path of armed struggle, you will be released. Those of us who refused continued to be in jail, and those who signed were left off. That is not the condition today. That's what I am saying. So we must keep that broad context, a historical perspective, when we discuss the present condition, the present situation that we are facing. No matter how hard and torturous and distressful it is, how heavy the losses we suffer, the conditions are quite favorable for the path of revolution, not only in our country but throughout the world. Now, having said that, that does not mean that there is nothing to think about. We can just continue as of old and everything will be fine. It's not a matter of a blind optimism, but a rather realistic evaluation of the potential that is existing in the present situation. We know very well that every revolutionary movement that has stood true to its principles, to its aims, has suffered severe repression. Again and again. It's all over the world, everywhere you see that, not only in our country. And whenever such a heavy repression takes place, there is always the question that comes up of what are the tactics that we have to adopt to overcome this. Now, in our country, especially in this part of our country, that is Telangana, Andhra, there is a direct experience of two various tactics that were used. One was the withdrawal of the Telangana armed struggle, and the other was a suspension of armed struggle in the 70s, just immediately after the withdrawal of emergency. The first led to a total surrender. It led to the imprisonment of thousands of comrades, and who knows how many were killed then. There is no exact account. 50 were put on trial and sentenced to death by the Nehru government, despite all the gentlemen's agreement between the revisionists and the Congress government of that time. And it is only because of a mass movement that they finally were able to get out of the gallows. So that was one experience, where at that time also, when the armed struggle was withdrawn in 1951, the undivided Communist Party leadership had informed or instructed its cadres that this is just a tactics to overcome the present repression, and once we get things back organized again, we will be resuming the struggle again as a partisan struggle or something. But then we know that has not happened. Step by step, it went into parliamentarism and finally abandoned the path of armed struggle altogether. Not only that, I personally know a person who was in the Air Force during the Second World War. He was a member of a communist cell, and these communist cells had been organized all over India in the armed forces, in the Air Force, in the Navy, as well as in the Army. And in some places where this mutinies took place against the British commanders, they were the leaders actually. This whole list of people was betrayed by the Communist Party leadership to the Congress government, and all of them got arrested. And they were all imprisoned in the barracks behind the Teenmurti Bhavan, where Nehru, as the new Prime Minister of India, was living. It was earlier the residence of the Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces. So that was one experience of the so-called tactics to overcome repression. We have the other experience of the 70s, where though there might be some differences about how exactly that should have been formulated and all that, that did not lead to surrender. Rather, it led to paving the way for building the movement in a totally new manner, in a totally new, broadly organized manner, of the formation of organizations like the RSU and the youth organization, the Kisan Sabhas, the huge go to the villages movements, all which led to the formation of squads and all that, which finally we know led up to the present struggle that is going on in the Dandagaranya area. A similar thing happened in Bengal also, where MCC and then the party Unity also took initiative, and that also led to big, huge movements, which ultimately led up to the development of a new phase of armed struggle in these places. So we have both these examples before us. One where the tactics is, though always put forward as a means of overcoming repression, leads to surrender, or an adoption of a tactics which leads to a resurgence of the movement. So this is very crucial, that what exactly is this tactics about, and that tactics can serve the cause of overcoming repression and rebuilding the movement in a broader, a better manner, only if it sticks to the path that is necessary for carrying out the revolution in a country. Now, as far as our country is concerned, which is a semi-colonial, semi-feudal country, it is a clear thing that the path that has to be followed is that of a protracted people's war. I do not think that there is any reason, objective, any fact or condition that demands a re-examination of that path. The conditions in our country, as far as this basic aspects are concerned, of the semi-colonial, semi-feudal characteristics of our country are concerned, are very much evident even today, and especially that semi-colonial part, the part of the subjugation to imperialism, it is becoming more and more glaring day by day. In the coming days, we are going to see that even in even more glaring manner, when the Modi government is going to sign away our whole agriculture sector to please his US masters. Now, that said, does that mean that there is no need for a revision of tactics on how exactly we go about this? Precisely because when you speak about an agrarian revolution that comes along with a characteristic of the country as a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country, how exactly is this agrarian revolution going to proceed? Because over the years, it is very clear that semi-feudalism is there, but a lot of changes have also taken place in that. It has taken place because of various reasons. I will read a portion from what I have written here, which is actually quoted from a study on this matter. When compared with the British period, there are considerable changes in semi-feudalism. Government reforms and various revolutionary democratic struggles have brought about a change in feudal exploitation, forms of exploitation, and the rural class composition. New forces have become part of the feudal forces. Government, non-government, a party, cooperative, panchayat, police networks have taken form. A new form of feudalism and a new form of exploitation also, of control also. So this is a new condition that has emerged in many parts of the country. It is partly because of the deepening of bureaucrat capitalism, the spread of bureaucrat capitalism, and it is also partly the result of the struggles waged by the peasantry under revolutionary organization leaderships or democratic and progressive organization leaderships. So this condition, and there is another aspect also, which is related to the fact that the more and more bureaucrat capitalism deepens its control, its grip in the country, its penetration in the country, the more and more the demand for monetary returns increases, because everything now demands cash. So the monetary income becomes very important for every peasant family, for every family generally, but also most importantly for the peasant family when we discuss the aspect of the agrarian revolution, which means the cash returns from agriculture becomes very important. And if you look at the conditions over the past many years, you can see that generally this has been on a decline. It has not kept up with the demands that are there in the present world. So as a result of this, a large section of youth are turning away from agriculture or from these traditional occupations. It is not just agriculture. For example, you can see the same thing along the coastal regions of our country among the fisher people, fisher folk. Because the returns from fishing are going down, the expense that is required to carry out fishing is going up, and it simply is not able, the returns that they are getting, the surplus that they are getting is simply not enough to meet their daily demands, cash demands. So as a result, a large section of the youth there are moving away from that occupation to various other fields, whatever field they can get into. The same is true of agriculture also. And of course, agriculture mainly because it is the most important field of employment in our country. Now, it is true that after the COVID pandemic, where lakhs and lakhs of people were forced to migrate back to the villages, and the economy, industrial economy has not really revived in any significant manner after that, the number of people engaged in agriculture has increased according to the latest data. But that is because of compulsion, because they have no other way. There is no other way, avenue they can turn into, no sector they can turn into. But that trend of moving away from agriculture, of seeing agriculture as a, a no profit zone, a loss-making zone, and something that is not valuable in future, not worthy in future, that is there in all aspects. Like for example, the marriage market. Whereas earlier, even a landlord's son commanding some hundreds of acres would immediately find a bride in the marriage market. The reports today indicate that that is not the case. No matter you have hundreds or thousands of acres, if you are in the rural area, you are not going to get a bride. That condition has now come up. Because people see agriculture again as not as a profitable or as a upcoming sector. So this has implications for the tactics of agrarian revolution. In some studies that have been carried out about the anti-displacement struggles in our country, it has been noted that the response to the displacement measures of the government are quite varied. In some very backward regions of the country, specifically in the Adivasi areas, the struggle against displacement is directly focused on the question that they will not leave the land. They don't want to leave the land. They want to keep the land. And that is related to their own occupation, and other thing also, it is also related to some of their religious beliefs and all that. But in other areas, it has been noted that the struggle against displacement is often focused on getting a higher return for the land, a higher compensation. The concern is not so much about losing land, but the concern is to get as much as compensation as possible. Because they see that once this land is handed over, the corporate sector, once they grab that land, they are able to make a huge profit by increasing the value of the land through making some additions and all that. So keeping that opportunity cost in mind, the farmers there, the peasants there are demanding a higher compensation. So the importance, the significance of these two types of responses is this, that a struggle directly making land to those who till it, the land question, if you make that the central slogan for mobilization, in the former area, that would definitely have an immediate response because land is very much vital to their existence. But in the other type of areas, that sort of slogan might not attract so much of support, mass support as an immediate tactical slogan. On the contrary, in such areas, the struggle might have to be more directly focused on this nexus that I spoke about, this party, cooperative, panchayat, police, nexus with the local dominant landlords, dominant caste people and all that. So this sort of variation in tactics, this is definitely required. Though the path remains the same and the overall strategy would also remain the same, one would have to make these sort of adjustments in tactics when one gets actually into the practice in the present period. Because obviously, the necessity of building up of powerful mass movements continues as it was in the earlier period, but one has to take care to formulate the proper tactics for that, giving these various conditions in mind. There is another aspect that we have to consider also, which is the question of how exactly do we understand semi-feudalism. Quite often, the issue is simply reduced whether the classical forms of a feudal exploitation are seen or not. So that if that is not seen, if wage labor is more than tenancy, or if the traditional forms of domination are not seen, then it is immediately said that that is the example of growth of capitalism. But the problem there is that a failure to understand properly what is meant by bureaucrat capitalism. Mao Zedong had defined bureaucrat capitalism as a capitalism that is engendered by imperialism in the countries it has subjugated, a capitalism which is tied up to the interest of both imperialism and feudalism, serving both of them, a capitalism which is directly tied up with the state. So these are the specific features of this type of capitalism, which means that it never leads to an elimination, a total wiping out of feudalism, as in the case of the classical capitalism that we saw in the western part of the world, I mean the western countries. Rather, this form of capitalism would always keep on gendering new forms of feudalism. It would transform it as well as prop up some new forms also. So therefore, one cannot expect to see the typical types of feudal exploitation, typical types of feudal domination in our conditions. I will just give you some example. If you look at the case of tenancy, for example, in Kerala, nowadays mechanization of agriculture has gone up to a great degree compared to some 20 years back. Some 20 years back, when I had done a study of the agrarian relations Kerala, I had pointed out how the three types of tenancy, labor tenancy, crop tenancy as a share of crops, as well as cash, these three forms were existing. Labor tenancy in the sense that the person who is taking the land on rent is paying by doing labor on that land, by planting coconut palms or rubber or something or the other, which has to be handed over to the owner of the property after a specific period of time. These three types are existing, and even in the case of cash cropping, where in the case of cash tenancy, where the returns, the rent has to be paid as in money, and where the crop is a cash crop, even there also one can see the characteristic of feudalism, semi-feudalism, in the sense that it was subsistence tenancy. That is, for example, one knows from Marxist studies on the question of tenancy, he makes a variation between ground rent and differential rent. Differential rent is the rent, that extra rent, so to say, that comes because from a land that is more fertile than other lands. So since the produce is better than the other areas, the landlord can demand a higher rent, and that rent is what Marx characterized as differential rent. But in my study of Kerala, I found that even in areas where the fertility is high and the productivity of the land is higher, the rent was lower than other areas. The only reason for that was there were less people demanding land for tenant culture in this area, cultivation in this area compared to other areas, because people in this area had other occupations. They were mainly involved in, speaking of the basic masses, they were mainly involved in construction and various other activities. So they did not as much need this to supplement their income, this tenancy. Whereas in other areas, the people had to rely on this supplemental income coming from tenancy to get on with their lives, because they had very few other manual labor opportunities. So one sees a classical case where the laws of tenancy do not operate according to the logic of capitalism. They rather operate according to the logic of the demand of the people, which again is decided not by the laws of capitalism, but by the backwardness of the whole economy. Coming to the present, what I noticed now recently in a case is a person who had taken 50 acres of land on rent. He was mostly doing it in a mechanized manner. Manual labor was very little. But on discussing with him about the returns that he is getting from this and all that, he said that I am able to maintain a middle class lifestyle with the income from this agriculture. By middle class lifestyle, he means of course an upper middle class lifestyle, not the bottom level or anything. But note that he is speaking about maintaining a lifestyle. He is not speaking about accumulation that's possible from those 50 acres of agriculture that he is doing on tenancy, that he is able to accumulate so much amount of money, turn it into capital, invest it again in agriculture or various other fields. He is not accumulating. He is earning enough or extracting enough surplus to maintain a lifestyle, which I think is a very classical example of how semi-feudalism operates. It is not operating according to the logic of capitalism there. Though he is doing tenancy on a broad scale, though he is employing wage labor, though he is using machinery and all that, it is still not operating according to the logic of a capitalist economy. So this aspect, the reason I am giving in this in detail is that when we try to understand what semi-feudalism is, when we try to work out the tactics appropriate to a certain situation of struggle, one must keep these particularities in mind, but also understand, go deeper into it and understand whether it represents the capitalist logic or the traditional semi-colonial, semi-feudal logic, the logic of bureaucrat capitalism, because that determines the overall path, the overall direction. So this is one aspect of the present situation. The other aspect that we have to take note of today, I think, is the increased casualization of labor. Now, for a long time, it is true that in our country, the major chunk of the workers, even in the modern sector, that is the industrial sector, have been casual workers. We know that the big factories, employment in the big factories has been very little when compared to that in the informal sector. But this casualization is now no longer restricted to the working class. Look at the faculty of our academic institutions today. Throughout the country, the larger section of the faculty, especially those have been newly appointed over the past 10-15 years, are all casual workers, day workers. They are paid according to the number of days they work or the number of hours they do, take lectures and all that. In other words, casualization has now spread very much into the petit bourgeois sections also. We are speaking about college lecturers, associate professors and all that. They are appointed as associate professors, assistant professors, not associate, assistant professors and all that. But they are basically casual workers working on a daily wage work basis. They can be sent out of employment anytime and they get only paid for the days of work that they work, days of employment. They actually go for teaching. So this casualization is creating a new condition. Precarity is now spreading out, which of course creates a shady condition for these people, but also prepares the ground for a larger section to get conscious of the condition they are working in. We can see that happening where this precarity, this casualization first took hold was in the Western countries, in countries like America, Canada and all that. You might have heard that last year there was a series of struggles in the Canadian universities and American universities organized by associations of these type of what are known as tenured teachers. They are called as tenured people there because they work according to a specific tenure. It was a big struggle. So people who consider themselves as petit bourgeois away from all these struggles that we are safe and secure and all that, they are getting shaken out of that what do you say, complacency, they are being forced to come into the realization that we are not equally in a precarious situation like the casual worker who is working in a service petrol pump or any other place or in an informal industry or wherever. So this actually broadens the scope of struggle and organization. I mean, and there are so many new opportunities of organization also coming up, like gig workers, for example, all the Swiggy, Zomato, delivery agents, etc., etc. A whole new field is opening up there. And we can see that now gradually they are also started organizing and getting into struggle. For example, Uber workers have recently organized and formed an association to take up struggle. Gig workers like Swiggy and Zomato people have come into struggle. All sorts of new sections of people are being forced to come into the path of struggle, which is opening up an opportunity which was not existing earlier. It is actually brightening the prospects for mass activity and mass mobilization. Then there is also the question of the spread of communications and the possibility it offers to produce and popularize counter narratives. Look at what's happening in Palestine today. And look at the Western media, like say for example BBC, CNN, etc., leaving out Al Jazeera. Where do the people today get information about Palestine? It is from the social media, from Instagram, from Facebook, from WhatsApp and all sorts of things. And it is a very vibrant space where the youngsters are coming up with all sorts of ideas to expose the Zionists, to expose the imperialists who are supporting them, and to rally support for the people of Palestine, from the people of Gaza. I mean, it's undescribable, the sort of crazy ideas that they come up, creative ideas that they come up, to push this idea that genocide is going on and we have to protest, we have to come out on the streets, we have to do something about this. You cannot keep silent. It is a powerful counter narrative, and so powerful that even the Zionists and the imperialists have now started instructed their think tanks to come up with methods of how to counter this, because the narrative is no longer in their hands. Earlier they were able to control the narrative. What they said was considered as true, because there was no other counter voice. If at all there was a counter voice, it was very feeble, not broadly understood or heard. That is not the situation today. There is a powerful counter narrative exposing at each and every instance the truth of what is happening. And now look at the agitations that have come up in America against this forced deportation of people. It was spontaneous, but at the same time organized. And the youngsters have come up with so many new methods of communication, of evading surveillance, of evading face recognition technology, of evading the cell phone surveillance of the state, that the state is simply finding it difficult to keep its control over this. So this is a new situation again, that the whole possibility, potential that is coming up for a counter narrative through the social media, even when that is blocked, as we know that once you get past a certain viewership in the social media on Palestine or some such issue, immediately your account is suspended or blocked and you are simply cut off from communication. But all these things are being evaded. They are being broken through. New forms are coming up. And new forms of decentralized social media networks are also coming up, like Mastodon, Diaspora and all that. So that again the state is finding it impossible or difficult to control. Even in a country like China, which has got sort of 360-degree surveillance, total surveillance, new Maoist groups are coming up which are doing active propaganda on a day-to-day basis about what is happening in China, what happened in China during the Cultural Revolution, and bringing out accounts of the present reality, spreading the word of Mao Zedong and Maoism all over the country through the net. They are getting suppressed, again they are coming up in some form, some other place. It is going on repeatedly. So this new potential again is something that is totally absent earlier, which is a very powerful factor aiding any revolutionary organization to meet up to the challenges it faces and push forward again. And not only that, we have to keep the technology is now far more easily accessible. For example, look at that youth movement that came up in Chhattisgarh. Mulwasi Bachao Andolan, correct, yeah. It's totally organized by the Adivasi youth, youngsters, +2, SSLC, etc., etc. And look how they utilize the smartphone there. They had their own YouTube channels, they were doing interviews on YouTube, they were putting out propaganda through YouTube, they were mobilizing people through that smartphone. It is, I mean, it is in a most backward part of the country. So just imagine what is the huge potential if that is consciously taken up by in areas where you have far more facilities to do all these things. So this is again I am pointing out how technology has now become far more accessible than it was earlier. In the 70s, cyclostyling was itself a very dangerous and a very challenging task. To get a cyclostyling machine was a practical impossibility, and if you got one also, it was not at all an easy task to get the ink, etc., 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 secretly. But today's Xerox machines are spread all over the country. All sorts of reproducing methods are available all over the country, and you don't even have to go for printing. You have your smartphone, which is both useful for the enemy to track us and for us to track the enemy also. So this potential, again I am pinpointing, is these are the new factors that are there. So then, keeping these in mind, I am not going into spelling out tactics and all that, because it is not my task, I don't think, or anybody of us to do that, because it is actually the people who are in the field who have to work these things out, given the concrete conditions they face. But overall, if we look at the world conditions, world situation, we can see a particular situation today where on the one hand, the imperialist forces have not been able to succeed in their plans. Yes, it is true that a horrific genocide is taking place in Palestine. They have been able to, attack and smash the Hezbollah. They have been able to check Iran and overall carry out many such things. But if you look at the position of imperialism in the early 90s or even the early 2000s, what was the attitude of imperialism at that time, the opinion makers of imperialism? We know that Fukuyama statement of end of history and all that. And the whole attitude was that there is now nothing to, no bar before us, that we will do whatever we want to do. And they carried out their things by forming the WTO, by imposing the, Duncan Treaty on the whole world, especially the third world, by going on attacking Iraq, and so many things. But the crisis of 2008, financial crisis of 2008, upset this whole thing. And from there you can see that they have been forced to step back. Though aggressiveness is continuing, they are on the offensive in many places, but they have been forced to step back, so much so that instead of globalization, now all the leading imperialist countries and their think tanks are talking about protectionism, how to protect their own economy. And we see that what Trump is trying to do now, and the contradictions it is creating among the imperialists themselves, by the unilateral imposition of tariff and all that. So that is one thing, that imperialism has not been able to push ahead and carry out its plans as it wanted to. It has been forced to step back. That is one thing. Second thing, if you look at the revolutionary forces, there also you can see that the promise they held in the 2000s of a huge advance forward, a potential for a huge advance forward. We saw that in our country, we saw that in other countries also. That also has not realized. And we have suffered some serious setbacks, like for example, the setback in Peru, setback in Nepal, and our own condition also. Similar, more or less similar conditions are there in Philippines also, though they have been better at holding on, still they are facing serious repression, and the potential or the possibility they saw of going forward to another stage in their people's war has not been actualized. So the revolutionary forces too have not been able to push ahead as they wished to, or they thought it was possible to. Now these two things are happening, on the one hand for the enemy and on the other hand for the people. But as far as the broad masses are concerned, they have never kept quiet. Country after country after country, we have seen upsurges, huge upsurges, even leading to regime changes, like for example in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh. Every country, one after the other, whether it is in Europe or whether it is in Asia or Africa or Latin America, wherever, the masses have never kept quiet. They have always been on the path of struggle, spontaneous, all right, not led by any organization, and as a result of that, after the struggle, sometime again the enemy recoups and forms some sort of a state, balance there again. They come back to power through one means or the other. But despite all that, that struggle, that is the most important thing, that has never stopped. And that actually shows us the real potential, that the masses are there. They are on the path of struggle. They have never stopped, and that is true of our country also. Because despite the repression that we are facing, in various parts of the country, struggles are taking place on specific issues, local issues that affect them. Despite all the betrayals and all the repression that they have faced, the masses have not quit the path of struggle. So this, I think, we should keep in mind when we talk about the repression today and the problems we face and the way we have to go forward. And in conclusion, I've given some examples. You might have heard of the struggles going on in Myanmar, in old Burma, where after the fascist army took over power again, a new resistance fronts came forward, and those resistance fronts started linking up with the existing national liberation struggles. And out of all this, there has been a revival of the Communist Party of Burma and its People's Liberation Army, which was suppressed for a long time. That is a new development that has taken place in Myanmar. We don't know much about this Communist Party of Burma, its ideology, its politics and all that, but that has happened. Or take the case of Kenya, for example. A revisionist party in Kenya, a revolutionary section within that has broken with the revisionist leadership and adopted Marxism-Leninism, Maoism. That is a recent development. So these sort of developments are taking place on the one hand. New communist forces are coming up. Now if you look at on the other end, there is an example that I cite in my notes of a pop singer in Kerala. Some of you might have heard about him. His name is Vedan. Vedan actually is a caste name. They are supposed to be hunter-gatherers and all that, and that word has the meaning of hunter. Now he is a rap singer. He is attracting crowds of some 20,000, 30,000 youngsters whenever he goes for some performance. The RSS is extremely annoyed with him, and they are trying their best to attack and corner him, which has made him even more popular. The CPM initially tried to suppress him, and when they saw that that's going to turn the opposite way, they are trying to co-opt him now. The interesting thing about this youngster is the politics of his songs. Thus, each and every song, his rap song, is extremely political, dealing with contemporary issues, worldwide issues, like what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Syria, and all sorts of things in our country, all over. And very clearly anti-caste with the standpoint of caste annihilation. And whenever he starts singing, he first spells out the lines that he is going to sing. Sort of recites the lines. And then asks the audience, the youngsters, do you understand what I am speaking about? And the interesting thing is that a huge roar of yes comes up immediately. What I am saying is connecting with that audience with the politics. And that is not one or two or 20,000, 30,000, so much so that in some instances, the walls of the auditorium were broken down by these youngsters in their rush to get into the hall. Again, an example of what the condition of the masses are today. Then look at the example of Greta Thunberg. We know she started out as a campaigner against climate, climate change and the ecological disaster that is happening in the world. Where has she progressed to? She has progressed to the realization that climate change cannot be separated from the genocides and oppressions that is taking place all over the world. And if you want to fight and end climate change, you have to fight and end all these sort of oppression also. And interestingly, once she arrived at that position, and when she started speaking about that position, she became a person non grata for the imperialist media. You don't hear about Greta Thunberg and BBC or CNN or anything else. She is not invited to the talk shows with these media people. But on the contrary, she is getting more and more popular on sites like Instagram and Facebook, precisely because of the new stance that she has taken. An example of the radicalization that is taking place in our present world. So these are the indications that we see all around us, in our country, all over the world. And therefore, I have concluded this, and I'll read that out like this. Thoroughgoing optimists that communists are, the future for us has always been bright. You know that famous saying, the road is tortuous, but the future is bright. Well, not just the future, the present too is bright. There is deep rage, seething rage among the masses all over the world. Clarity in ideology will allow one to shake off despair caused by savage repression and pierce the fog of pessimism to see this wonderful potential, to link up with it, grasp its manifold possibilities, and promote the realization in order to continue the ongoing task of changing the world. So with those words, I will conclude. Lal Salam to all of you.